And now on Nights with Steve Price, the Courses and Careers Show with Danny Bielik. Thanks to Management Consultancy International. Go to mci.edu.au.
Danny's with us. He's still offshore. He's in Singapore. How are you, Danny?
I am well, thanks, Steve. How are you?
Good, thanks. Obviously, the conversation has been dominated in Australia for weeks, but also it came to a peak last night and again today after the executions in Indonesia. Now, Singapore executed an Australian who was caught with drugs. The outpouring of anger toward the country that did the killing was nowhere near the level against Singapore that it was against Indonesia. Is this being reported at all in Singapore?
Yeah, look, it is, Steve. And certainly if you look at the Singapore Straits Times today, it was one of the more prominent articles. But what seems to be receiving a lot of the editorial or a lot of the reporting column centimetres here is really about the potential diplomatic rift between Indonesia and Australia. And being in Singapore, Singapore being one of the closest neighbours to Indonesia and probably the most prominent economic power in the region, would be concerned about any rift between Indonesia and Australia. So certainly they're focusing on what impact the recall of the ambassador to Indonesia is having, and that seems to be what most of the newspapers here and indeed in Indonesia seem to be focusing on right now.
And in the business, you're in the business of selling Australian education to Asia. You must be concerned about the impact it would have on relationship between us and Indonesia.
Yeah, look, the thing is, Steve, that most of the people here in Singapore, certainly, and in Indonesia and in Malaysia and in Thailand, are pretty matter-of-fact people. They're very well aware. They live in a country that, they know either isn't a properly functioning democracy or has, certain aspects that aren't as good as they could be. And they're aware that from time to time, countries go through these certain periods. But by and large, the interpersonal relationships and the business relationships and the educational relationships survive that and go go on as normal. Certainly educational relationships will continue as normal. I don't see there being any impact on the international student industry for Australia out of Indonesia, and Indonesia is one of the largest source markets of students into Australia.
Is it ever? It's a big export ticket item for us. Now, we're going to talk tonight on the Courses and Careers Show about how your business needs to increasingly be smart socially online. I would have thought every business has finally clicked into the modern way of dealing with social media, hasn't it?
Yeah, no.
No?
Definitely not, Steve.
Really?
And in fact, I'll tell you, I think a lot of this appears to have caught not just employers, but some employees by surprise as well. And I'll give you a few examples. First of all, if you look from an employer's perspective, social media is absolutely critical. And it doesn't matter if you're operating the local chicken shop or you have you're an education provider like MCI, or you are a multinational organisation. Social media is not something that you can ignore. Everywhere, it's basically all-pervading, whether it is your employees sitting doing work at their computer or behind the cash register or on the factory floor, and they've got their mobile phone in their pocket and they're messaging friends, or they're putting messages on Facebook, "I'm bored at work today," or "I wish my boss would lay off," or any of this sort of stuff can genuinely have an impact on the workplace. Often employees create friendships inside organisations, and those friendships extend to their relationships on social media like Facebook and Instagram. And it's really important for employers to understand the impact that could have. Equally, as an employer, you've also got to be cognizant that people could be, you might have a disgruntled employee who leaves a negative comment or constantly makes negative comments about your company in forums like LinkedIn.
Well, we had
a
classic example over the Anzac weekend of a sports reporter from SBS, Scott McIntyre, who took to Twitter to, in a most abusive manner, take on the Anzac myth and legend in an appalling way and make all sorts of dreadful claims about the Anzacs. He got sacked.
Yeah, and look, that's a really, really egregious example of the sort of abuse of social media that an employee can make. And we've had multiple examples of this sort of thing happen before. Former Age columnist Catherine Devaney was sacked in 2010 after a series of tweets during the Logie breakfast. One of them was, "I do hope Bindi Irwin gets laid." She was 11 years old at the time. Mike Carlton, very famously, ended up getting sacked from Fairfax after a whole bunch of tweets, and that was you covered that quite well on 2GB.
Well,
and
Catherine Devaney, I mean, how she ever had a job, I've got no idea anyway, but that's another question.
And the thing is, Steve, that, they're really egregious examples and very public examples, but what do employers do about things that are a little bit, closer to home and maybe affect smaller businesses, but in a very close-knit way? So that sort of bad comment on LinkedIn or something like that. And I'd love to hear from callers who might have experienced that sort of thing. So that's an example of how social media can really start to impact businesses big and small in Australia. Equally, there's some really positive things for employers from the rise of social media as well. For example, employers can find it really much easier to employ people by looking at LinkedIn profiles, by searching on LinkedIn. You can search for people. If I need an electrical engineer, for example, I could look for people who have experience in certain things, who maybe have studied a degree over 4 years, or maybe have a master's degree or something like that. And for people who have really good profiles on LinkedIn, and I'd recommend everybody does, have a really good profile on LinkedIn with all of their degrees that they have, all of the diplomas that they have, all of the work experience that they have. That can actually make it quite easy for an employer to find an employee.
Well, I want to come back and get you to explain exactly what LinkedIn is. I have a LinkedIn account. I don't know that I've ever used it properly or understand why I've got it. Danny Bielik's with us. He's offshore in Singapore. He's back after this.
You're listening to the Courses and Career Show with Danny Bielik. Thanks to Management Consultancy International. Go to mci.edu.au.
Danny's in Singapore. I know you're good on the tooth. Have you had the fish head curry yet?
I'm about to head out for some chili crab shortly.
Oh, yes, the pepper crab. Go the pepper crab. You going to those crab shacks out on the way to the airport?
Yeah, I'm going to have to. They've shut that down. East Coast Seafood Centre. It's all gone, Steve. Oh, it's all gone. I'm so sad to see it go. Yeah, no, it is.
They were fantastic. So I hope you found an alternative. Oxford Circus, maybe?
Yeah, Newton Circus. We might be. You might see me in one of those sorts of places tonight if anyone's listening in Singapore.
What's LinkedIn? I have it. What do I do with it?
Okay, so LinkedIn. Think Facebook for work, right? That's really the best way to describe it. It is so important for everybody, and I mean everybody, listening to the show tonight, to put a profile up on LinkedIn and fill it all in. It'll take you half an hour. Where did you go to school?
I wouldn't want to tell anyone that.
Yeah, well, most of us are quite proud of our educational achievements, Steve.
Yeah.
But
it won't take much. It won't take me more than 3 minutes to write that out.
But what it is it does a number of things. First of all, it allows employers to find you. It also allows you to communicate with people who have interests, work-related interests in like subjects. So, for example, I am a member of a number of groups on LinkedIn relating to higher education, to vocational education, to online education. And we discuss and communicate about all sorts of different things. Our executive director, Denise Myerson, always posts blogs about really interesting new educational techniques that she discovers. She posts them to LinkedIn, and then other people reply. And these are experts all around the world, and they're adding value to this. But what's really important...
My club would be pretty small.
What? I'll join it, Steve. I'll join it, Steve. And by the way, for listeners out there, if you want to see a really, really good profile, please go and add me, Danny Bielik, Bielik. Not that it's a bit of a shameless plug. But
it is a shameless plug.
There's a bit of a competition around the MCI office who can have the most LinkedIn followers. But look, it's really important because employers are looking at your social media. What are you saying about yourself, and what are people saying about you? If you think about Facebook, think about Facebook and think about LinkedIn
I don't even know what Facebook is.
As your first interview. If you're going to look for a job, it doesn't matter what it is. You know what employers are going to do? They're going to go on to LinkedIn. They're going to go on to Facebook. They're going to see what other people are saying about you. Absolutely. They want to know, are you a stark raving loony? Are you a racist? Do you have bad things to say about your previous employers? These things are death. So, these are things that are really important to make sure you have well managed if you're going to be looking for a job now or sometime in the future. And the time to really start is now. You really need to have those sorts of things.
Is there somewhere you can go to access that information on how to properly manage your social network accounts?
Yeah, look, I think, in fact, Denise Myerson has put some interesting articles up on our blog, and you can go and have a look at blog.mci.edu.au, and we've had a look at some of that stuff previously.
I guess it'd be really important, the LinkedIn, and probably people, jump off and do this when you lose a job, when you're trying to get re-employed. And
that's the wrong time to start. That's absolutely the wrong time to start. The right time to start is when you're happy in a job and contributing and writing lots of articles and commenting on lots of articles. Equally, Steve, LinkedIn has been around for a very, very long time, and it's a pretty good place to be for general employment-related stuff and work-related stuff. What started to happen more recently, and this is how fast these changes are happening, is that there's all these specialty networks. And I'd highly recommend that people go and look at some of these. Depending on what sort of industry you're in or are interested in, it's important to be a member of some of these sorts of things. So, for example, people who are interested in government-related jobs, and that could even mean teachers and nurses. GovLoop is like a LinkedIn or a Facebook for government people. If you're looking at the healthcare industry, there's one called Doximity, Doximity. There's one for people in the financial services industry called SumZero, SumZero. So there's all these sorts of things that are popping up. And again, employers and employees all need to be completely aware of the existence of these sorts of things and the impact that it could have on your workplace now and in the future.
When you're back in the country and you've finished stuffing your face with chili crab, we might actually get some calls on just how to manage those accounts. We'll get Denise in with you as well and talk that through. Thank you for joining us from Singapore. You look after yourself. We'll see you in the studio next week.
Thanks, Steve. See you next week.
That's Danny Bielik, offshore in Singapore. He'll be back with us next week.